Hi. This will be a series of videos in which basically I will be taking you guys through how I do my modeling of the scene, how I do the materials, how I set up my cameras, how do I do the lighting, where I take my inspiration from. This will be divided into different videos. The first one that we will be looking at is mainly lighting, how to use different lights, rectangular lights, HDRIs, and suns. I will take you through each light in full detail and how I use that specific light in a scene, what tips and tricks I use to achieve a certain look in my images. So let's just jump into it. So whenever I start working on a project or on a specific scene, I look at what the styling of the scene is. If the client has specified any specific styling, I'll go to my collection of images and I'll start going through different spaces, and I'll try and look for an image which best speaks to me about the lighting in a scene. So if I, let's say, go through these images and I say I really like the lighting in this scene, I'm going to use that as a reference. It's always good to have a reference when you're doing the lighting. Otherwise it gets a bit tricky to achieve realism, because you might have a sun outside and then you might turn the lights on and you might bump up the intensity, but in real life that'll be really hard to achieve, which actually gives away that the image is not real. To actually keep that realism in the image, it's always best to go on the internet and just look for images which you think look really good and they have like really good light quality in them. So I've got like a couple of images here, which I feel like the lighting in them is really nice and soft. This is what I usually try and go for in an images. So it's always good to first go through these images, get your head around like what you want to achieve with the image that you are doing, and then try and replicate that into your image. Okay, so the first light that we'll be looking at is the main environment light. We're going to be using Corona Sky to light up our environment. Once we've loaded that map, we can load that into the environment map just by dragging and dropping that in. So, and to best test your lighting, it's advisable to always have a material override on it, so you don't actually get any reflections and displacement or refractions in the overall image. So I will just load a basic Corona material and I will plug that into the material override. And what I'll do is to actually get the light in through the glass material, so this doesn't affect the glass. What I'll do is I'll click preserve and I'll hit preserve the glass material. So this override won't affect the glass material. Once I've plugged in the sky, what I'll do is I'll set up my light mix. So I'll just hit that and I'll just click generate. That will generate a render element for each and every light in the scene. And I'll just start the interactive render. So if I turn everything else off, so right now you can see the image overall, it looks really blue. And it doesn't give you that warmth in the image. If you're going for like a overcast scene and you want the scene to be really cloudy, what you can do is you can actually have the environment as your main light for the scene, and then what you can do is basically you can actually play around with the color that it's casting on the scene. So like if I don't want to make it too blue, I can go towards a bit more warmish tones. And then if you feel like you're not getting like sharp shadows or like not sharp per se, but more contrast in the image, so at times what I'll do is I'll try and block the light out as much as I can to introduce more contrast into my image. So basically what I'll do is basically I'll just get like a really big box. I'll get 2 of those, and as you can see, it's already starting to affect the scene. These 2 boxes, basically what they'll do is they'll guide the light into the scene. So from being a soft environment map, now it's becoming more of a directional light, but not like really harsh directional light, and you don't want to keep them straight. What I'll do is I'll actually just rotate them a bit, so, and I'll keep them just outside the window. So I'll grab that and I'll move that in, and now I'll show you the difference that these 2 boxes are actually making to the scene. Because what happens at times that you'll be looking at an image online, and you'll see that the image has like really good contrast, like the highlights are like very well lit and the dark areas can be clearly defined from the highlights. So if I go to history, I'll store that image and I'll just hide these, and see, like, now the scene is fully lit. It lost all its contrast that it had with those 2 boxes in. I'll show you a side-by-side comparison of the 2. So you can see the shadows became really defined when I added those 2 boxes in. This is a small trick that a lot of people use when they do want to have more contrast in the image rather than bumping the contrast of the whole image from there. It's better to use this trick so your highlights are controlled as well as your shadows. And it just adds really nice contrast in the image, and that's one trick that I use when I'm trying to light my scene and get like good shadows and good light into the scene. To play around it with bit more, what you can do is actually you can add a 3rd box in, so which will block out the light a bit more, and it might give you a bit more contrast. Because now what's happening is basically this 3rd box is sort of creating a tunnel. So previously the light was coming directly in through the window from this side, but now it's actually coming down this space and then going in. So you can control the light a lot better this way. And then what you can do is just bump up the multiplier of the environment map to get overall balance of light and dark into the image. So that was the first way that I sometimes use to light up my scene. So the second thing that I'll try and use is the Corona Sun. So I'll bring that in. I'll click and hold and drag in the middle of the scene and give it some height. Then I usually like to go to the front view to actually see the angle of the sun. And I'll also change the target to where I want the light to hit so I can control it a lot better. Once I've added the sun in, I'll generate my light mix again. Once that's done, I'll start the interactive. And I'll turn everything off. Go back to 0. With these Corona settings, by default, you might see that your highlights are being blown out. So you can increase the highlights value so they're better controlled and they don't blow out your image. um, and then you can play around with the contrast, but I would suggest not to add too much contrast into the raw image, because you can always go into post-production and actually add more contrast into the image there, rather than actually baking the contrast into the image at this stage, because once the contrast it's in the image, it'll be really hard to take it out. So I like to keep it at a certain point where I know it's not actually making my shadows full black or like burning up my highlights. um, and then you can play around with the LUTs as well, if you have any preference for any specific type of overall look of the image that you're going for. So you can experiment with that too. You can experiment with how much of that is actually affecting the image. Again, all this goes back to the reference image that you had when you started the project. So and then we'll leave the bloom and glare sharpening denoising for now. So let's just go back to light mix. So we've got our environment map in. We'll turn on the sun. So if I go into my sun settings, once you bring in the sun, you will have these settings on by default: intensity 1, size 1. So the size actually tells you how big or small the sun actually is. So the smaller the size, the sharper the shadows will be, and the bigger the size, softer shadows will be introduced into the image. So you can play around with how much softness you want in the image. If there's a cloudy day with a bit of sun, you will get softer shadows. And then changing the sun's height will actually change the time of the day. So right now the sun is really close to the horizon, so it's giving you like a very early morning look to the image. Again, at this time of the day, you usually get very soft shadows in the image, so I won't recommend using one with that low sun, because in reality, again, you will never get that much hard shadow at this time of the day. That's why I said that always have a reference image in your head that you're trying to follow, and looking at real images rather than other people's renders is the best way to do it. So always look at real images and try and see how hard the shadows are, how soft the light is. So like at this time of the day, I would go like even like to 20, 15. Again, you have to play around with these settings to get the right feel of the image. So if I start bringing up the sun, it will get more brighter as sun works in reality, and it will also start getting more sharp. So you can play around with the sun wherever you want it to be positioned. So sometimes it might actually help to play around with the light target as well, because that'll give you a point where you want your sun to hit. So in a living space, I've got it just in the center of my living space, and then I can have my sun there. And then I'll go to front view. I'll try and bring it a bit lower. I'll decrease the sun's intensity, and then I can increase the size of the sun to only see what the sun is actually doing in the scene. What you can do is actually turn the environment off. So now you get a true picture of what the sun is actually doing to the scene. So if I go back to size 2, you can see, so that's the sun. Those are the shadows you're getting. You can also sort of see how bright your bright areas are and how dark your shadows are. And then you can basically start introducing the environment light in rather than straight going to 1, 2, 3 settings. I would suggest like go step by step and see what works better. So like even right now I can see like this area is being blown out a bit and the sun intensity is too strong, specifically in this area. So what I'll do is I'll keep that in mind, and for now I'll decrease the sun intensity so it looks more natural. And then when I'm doing the post-production on the scene, what I'll do is basically I'll get a mask of that wall, and if I want the sun intensity to increase on that wall, I'll just mask it out and increase that separately to this, so I get more balanced light in my image. And then same thing, I'll keep bumping up the environment and leave it to the point where I feel like I've got enough light in my scene. The highlights are looking good, the shadows are looking fine, and I'll just leave the image there. And if you are doing like a very cloudy, overcast scene and you're not getting the look that you're going for with just the environment map, what you can do is, again, you can use the sun to actually mimic it as a big soft box light. So for that, what I'll do is I'll really increase the size. So 64 is the maximum that Corona supports the sun to go at. So again, I'll turn that off. And on a cloudy day, you will never get like a yellow sun hue. So I would switch to direct input. So it will give me a white light. This will help me to actually get that shadows in, and I can control them a lot better rather than just having the environment in with those boxes. Again, sometimes with a particular scene it might work, sometimes it might not. So you can play around with the sun direction where you like it if you want that area to be in dark. So I would always suggest like move the sun around and see what it's doing to your image. Once you're happy with the look, again, I'll start doing the same thing. Is I'll start introducing the environment map in and sort of using that as the filler light. So the next lighting system we are looking at is the HDRI. So with the HDRI, I've seen a lot of people, they use HDRI and they've got it off from the internet, and it came with the sample image, and they were like, I really like the lighting in that HDRI, so I'm gonna use that. But once they start using the HDRI, their images look really flat. So I'll show you how to use the HDRI and a couple of tips and tricks to how to actually use the HDRI to its full potential. So if we jump back into Max, I've got a couple of HDRIs already loaded up here. First thing is to, if again you're working in Corona, I would always recommend using a Corona bitmap to load the HDRI in, because you will actually get the environment rotation in this map as compared to if you get the normal bitmap. So once I've got all my HDRIs set up with the Corona bitmap and the Corona color correct, what I'll do is basically I'll open the max setting dialog box and I'll set up a multi-map light mix. What this will help me do is basically, rather than changing the HDRI after every interactive render, this way I can set up like 5, 6 or as many as you want HDRIs into just one scene and then plug them all into these maps. You can increase and decrease the map count according to the number of HDRIs you are using in the scene. Once everything is set up, just hit setup light mix and click generate, and then close this dialog box, and now we can start the interactive render and start tweaking the HDRI. So I'll turn all of these off and I'll turn my first HDRI on. So this usually happens when you load an HDRI directly into your scene. You will not get a lot of contrast in the image. And as I showed earlier, is that over here the sun intensity was way too strong, and you can clearly define where the sun is actually hitting in the image, but that's not the intensity I'm getting in my image. So what's happening there? So the main reason is because all these are HDRIs, which is a high dynamic range image. What that means is basically all the shadows and highlights and everything, they are very even, so you actually won't be getting that much contrast from it. So you actually have to play around with the original HDRI to actually introduce that contrast back into the HDRI. So now if I open my Corona color correct, so the main settings that I do play around with in this box is basically, first will be the gamma, and second is the exposure, and I might tweak the saturation at times as well if I feel like the HDRI is casting too much blue in my scene, or it's too yellow, or if you want to change the hue of the HDRI, so you can do that there. But the main setting is just the gamma, exposure, or if you want to change the temperature. So how this works is basically, so gamma will only affect the bright spots in the HDRI. So right now, 1 being the default value, if I start decreasing this value, you'll see it will start making the sun more prominent, and it will start bringing in more light into your scene. So if I go 0.7, you'll see the contrast of the image is changing, and so the HDRI is behaving differently now. So now you're getting that nice sunlight into your image, which previously was lacking. But because you've decreased the gamma to 0.7 and you've added so much contrast into your image, it's basically making your shadows really dark, and it's crushing your blacks now. So to balance that out, is what you'll do is start introducing a bit more exposure into the scene. So if I bring that up to 1, if I go 0.5, so now this is becoming a much balanced scene, and the lighting from the HDRI, it looks more natural as compared to, just to show you the difference, I'll save this and I'll change that back to its original values. So as you can see, it clearly makes a lot of difference just by tweaking those two settings here. And if you don't do this and you think just increasing this value will actually make the HDRI work properly, it won't work, because what this multiplier is doing, it basically, it's taking your HDRI and then just multiplying it in screen mode. And what screen mode does, it basically just keeps making the overall image more and more bright. It won't specifically just make the sun bright and the shadows dark. So I always keep my HDRI's multiplier to 1, and then I increase and decrease the intensity from this box. So also I would suggest not to go below 0.7 or 0.6 if you really have to, because what will happen is you will start getting some artifacts in your scene, and you might actually see some color distortion as well. So like if I go to 0.2, you'll see it's completely blown out, because it has actually made the sky black and it kept the sun bright. So keeping it at like 0.7, 0.6 is is fine. Once you've got your sunlight in, and then again you can add more exposure into the scene. I'll show you the same thing with the second HDRI. So this one is a more dusk HDRI, so you don't actually see the sun directly in this HDRI, so you have to tweak this HDRI a bit differently as compared to the one which had a sun in it, because in this one it's actually hidden behind the clouds. So again, just to see what it's doing to the image, I'll just take that to 5. So with this one, I wouldn't recommend going even to 0.7, because you'll start getting a bit more like a lot of contrast in your image, because the sky is already really dark because it's a dusk HDRI. So first I'll increase the exposure of the HDRI to make it a bit more brighter. And if I go back to 1, so you can see like that exposure, it works really different from that multiplier. So if I take that back to 0, like even if I increase that to 500, which is a very high number, you won't get the same look and feel of the HDRI. So I would always recommend using lower values there and then increasing the exposure in this dialog box. And then to make the sun again more prominent into the HDRI, you can play around with these settings. And now if you feel like I do want a dusk scene, but this image is becoming too much pink and yellow and purple, so that's when the saturation actually helps control the HDRI, because I can say actually take like to saturation minus 0.2. Oh, let's go minus 0.1. So instead of decreasing the saturation there, because this saturation will actually affect the whole image, but this one is only affecting the HDRI. So if you do have other lights in your scene, it won't affect them. So if I turn on that light, so if I make this really hot, and if I go back, change that to -5, that light will stay as is, but the HDRI's saturation has been taken away, and hence it starts becoming more white because all the colors are gone. So again, you can get very different images from one HDRI just by tweaking these values. Okay, so let's jump on to the next HDRI. So with this one, I've done the same thing. I've plugged this into Corona bitmap and then into a Corona color correct. Let's just take the saturation back to normal. Again, different HDRIs behaves differently. With this one, as you can see, I've kept it to default value, and I'm still getting very nice contrast in the image. Again, it depends how good your HDRI is, how big is the resolution, bigger the better, and how much dynamic range is actually in that HDRI will actually help you define your image a lot better. So if I'm working with this HDRI and I feel like the shadows that I'm getting are too harsh, if I want this to be more soft, how do I do that in an HDRI? Because with the sun, I can just increase the sun size, and it will actually make the shadows soft. How do I do that with an image? So the way you make your shadows more soft is basically if you go back to your Corona bitmap, if you scroll down, you'll see there is a blur value here. So sometimes I might use this value to sort of trick. It's a small trick that I use to actually make my shadows a bit more soft. So lower the values, the sharper the HDRI will be. And if I make it 5, so as you can see, it actually made the overall HDRI a bit more blurry, and you will start getting more softer shadows. So if I go 50, you can see it's becoming really soft now. So I'm getting the same quality of the HDRI, but I'm not getting as harsh shadows as I was initially. I can go further higher. So I've gone like really high, 500, and you'll see that I'm still getting the same light that the HDRI had, but it's just a lot more softer now. So you can play around with this setting and see and find your basically own balance in the image, how much soft you want these shadows to be. So now you can't see like those shadows, and if I go back, the default value is usually kept at 1. You can bring it down to even 0.1 to actually make it more sharp if you want. So the next HDRI we're looking at is this one. Basically, it's a very bright sunny day HDRI, and as you can see is on the default values, it's actually blowing out my whole image and it looks too bright. So how do I fix that? So I'll do the opposite what I've done in the other images. So instead of increasing the exposure, I'll go lower, and as you can see, the HDRI starts to become more natural. And again, to get my sun to where I like, I can either go lower, which will actually make my sun intensity stronger, or in this case I might actually increase the gamma to get again a good balance in the image between my darks and my brighter areas. So maybe I'll go -3, and then I can go 1.1 in the gamma. And to add more color into the HDRI, right now it looks like the sun is very white and we're not getting that warmth in the HDRI. So I can either actually add a tint on the overall HDRI, or I can actually play around with the temperature. So the higher you go, the yellow your image will be, and you will start getting your sun to look more natural. So if we go 8,000, so that's looking more natural to me now. Or if you want to go the other way, so decreasing it will make your image more blue. You can use this setting again in any HDRI that you're using. And that's basically how you use an HDRI. You can change around your sky rotation to see what you prefer. And again, with this setup of multi light mix, I can quickly switch between multiple HDRIs and see which HDRI I prefer for that scene. Or you can even actually use different HDRIs for different cameras and different spaces. So the next lighting system we're looking at is the daylight systems. So if you go to your modifier panel on the extreme right, and you'll see this icon systems. Click that and you can find the daylight system at the bottom. Once you've selected that, come back to your viewport, click once, that'll create the compass, and then click and drag basically to create your sun. Once you've done it, right click to deselect it, select your compass, and then you can use this setting to actually make it bigger or smaller, whatever you like. And it doesn't matter where you actually put this daylight system in the scene, because this is a world scale, so it will only affect the orientation and only work according to whatever the compass is. So it will only work according to the compass and not according to where it's placed in your viewport. So once you've set that up, what you can do is basically you can rotate to actually get your sights, get it to match your sights north. So let's say in this project my north is facing that way. I will then select my sun. As I'm using Corona, I'll use Corona Sun in this system, and then I don't need any skylight. The second thing that I'll do is basically specify what date, time, and location of this project is. So I'll click setup, and it will open this dialog box, and you can see get location. So you can see it has the whole world in it. So what you can do is basically go to your region. I'm in Australia. I'll go to Australia, and then I'm in Melbourne. I'll select that and hit OK. And as you can see, the sun actually shifted because of what the time is. So if I change the time, you can see the sun is actually mimicking the real conditions. So it won't actually just change its position, but it also changes its height accordingly. So like at 12, it will be at its peak highest point, and then it starts to go further down in the day. So once you've got that in your scene, what you can do is basically set up your light mix again. So I've done that, and we'll hit the interactive render. Okay, so once I've got that setup done, what I'll do is I'll go back to my settings, and then I can tweak my sun just the same way as I would do when I've placed a normal Corona sun in. I can change the size of the sun to again create harder shadows or softer shadows. Let's just do realistic. And now what you can do is basically again go back to date and time, and you can actually use this to see if you will get any light in your living space in this project or not. So like in this one, I'm getting, because it's a north facing window, I'm getting good sunlight in my scene. And you can play around with this setting to actually test out what sort of lighting conditions we will be getting once we are in this space. So it's being represented to actually true conditions and what the buyer will actually get at the end. Also changing the month and the date also affects the sun position, because sun is never constant throughout the year. It changes every day and every month. So at 3 o'clock it will be in a different position in the 6th month as compared in the 7th or 8th month. So you can play around with these timings and try and find the true lighting conditions that you want for your scene. And then um, once you've done the timing, again you can change the sun intensity and the size the same way as you would do with the normal sun. So these were a few tips and tricks that I used to get different types of lighting in my scene and how I light up my overall scenes. As you can see, you can get very different scenarios by choosing different HDRIs and setting up your internal lights separately, and then using the light mix to play around with the environment and the internal lights to get different mood in your scene. I hope you learned something today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.